Hello, it's Mystic History Month. I started this tradition last year for the month of September, and that's where I create articles sharing pretty much history bits about different mystics that I somewhat respect. Um, they're all found on Patreon, but they're public, so you don't actually have to pay to be able to read the articles. And one of the easier ways to find the articles is through Facebook. Hashtag Mystic History Month will take you to all of the previous articles and the days that they were presented. If you want to keep up with that, follow the Facebook group, Cave of Mystery, public group on Facebook, where I'll be posting the article links there. But if you're already on Patreon, you'll get that plus some exclusive Patreon exclusive Mystic History Month inclusions for this celebration. I myself am somewhat of a historian. I love history. I didn't like it that much in school because they taught me all the stuff I didn't care about. But finding out about what I want, it makes history so much fun. And as a mystic, I respect mystics because it is a lot of wonderful things that people wouldn't believe happened in the world. So this video is just me having fun on camera, kind of nerding out about some of my favorite mystics in history. Some of the figures who have inspired me in some way. Now, if you look behind me, this has always been here, my poster with all these different faces. Now, some of them aren't mystics, but those are just people that I respect for one reason or another. That's my puzzle pieces. I honor something about each of those individuals on the wall behind me. You can see some of them. Others, my head is in the way, so you can't see, but I'll just list off the top of my head some of the things, some of the people that I love. Some of them might be on here. And some of the things that I've learned, or some cool facts about some of these people. One of my favorites starting out has always been Catherine Kuhlman. She is the one who inspired Benny Hinn into ministry. She was a traveling, I guess they would consider her a traveling evangelist, but that's simply because women weren't allowed to be called apostles back in her day, because she was far more apostolic than she ever was evangelistic. And she had a powerful miracle ministry. You can actually still find footage of some of her meetings on YouTube. She walked in such a place with God, such a place of intimacy with God, that has always been inspiring. Actually reading the opening chapter of Benny Hinn's Good Morning Holy Spirit, where it describes the intimacy that she walked in and some of the supernatural manifestations that she carried. It talked about how there would be clouds that would surround her and light would pour out of her body. And he talked about how she said, "Don't grieve the Holy Spirit. It's all I got." This is a woman who gave up everything in her personal life for more unity with God. That much I can respect. When the topic comes up of paying the price, I don't really know too many people who paid a price like Catherine. She did hundreds and thousands and possibly millions of healings, documented miracles, to the fact that doctors actually used to prescribe people to go to her meetings. So no, she wasn't faking anything. Doctors prescribe people to go to her meetings because they knew if they go to Catherine's meeting, they have a better chance of being healed there. She walked in so much power radiate out of her body that oftentimes, actually, they had to build a special walkway in the airport because sometimes she'd have so much power going through her that if she walked around regular people, they would pass out. So they created a special walkway for her to get around. There's stories of her going through the kitchen to escape the crowds because she understood that she was a public figure, but really didn't like the praise all too much. And there's a story where she went out the back and tried to leave through the kitchen. And as she entered the kitchen, she knocked all of the chefs and everyone else that was working in the kitchen to the ground just by the power that was radiating out of her body. One of her more dramatic manifestations that had occurred. I actually have pictures of this. If I thought about posting pictures, I would have I would have recorded this video different, but I don't want to add that. I do have the video. I do have the picture I'm talking about on the Discord. So if you join the Discord, you can see the picture. But on occasion, she would manifest the spirit realm to such an extent that thunder and lightning would strike on the inside of the building. And there's actually a picture of it that I do have. Upon her death, so much power left her body, it was like an EMP, and she actually knocked out all of the power in the hospital that she was in. And they said that the hallways filled with the scent of roses to the point where it was intoxicating. So that's just Catherine. Catherine has one of the best miracle ministries to date. People are still begging for her mantle, begging to be used as she was. Someone else that I love, Apostle Joseph A.O. Babalola from Africa. He is a man of God who isn't too much known. I wish I had known about him much sooner. But I did do an article on him already for last year's Mystic History Month. He was a man of prayer in that if he prayed for 4 hours, it was considered short and quick. People have stories of coming to see him, going to his revivals that he would host, and he would stand there praying and praying and praying and praying, and well, hours have gone by, and sometimes people had to leave, and they'd go home, go to work, and come back, and he's still standing in the same spot, praying, and then they'd leave and come back, and he'd still be there in the same spot praying, and he would do this for days straight. He would pray for days straight. Some of the phenomenon that would occur is that oftentimes in the middle of prayer, he would start walking around on the air. He had some of the greatest miracles of his time. I want to say there's up to 14 dead raisings that he did, all documented. One of his stories is that he walked through a village ringing a bell. His bells are all on display in CAC. Around his tomb. They keep all of his paraphernalia with him. But he would walk the streets ringing a bell, and it would cast out all of the demons in the city. He has stories of calling down physical fire to burn down trees that idolaters and warlocks and things like that were praying to and worshiping at. Man is full of miracles. It's so sad that we weren't actually taught much about him. Even when I was a Christian, they didn't teach us about Babalola. I learned about him on my own. Someone else who has always been inspirational is Sadhu Sundar Singh. He was an Indian missionary in the early 1900s. They called him the bleeding feet apostle because he didn't wear shoes and he would climb mountains. And you can imagine what that would do to a person's feet. So sometimes one of the ways they'd find them is that they look for the bloody footprints in the snow and in the grass and things like that. But part of his testimony is that he used to be a Christian persecutor. And one night he got so depressed that he was going to commit suicide, and he prayed to every god that he knew about. He prayed to Buddha, to Allah, Muhammad, everybody he could think of. And it wasn't until he got to Yeshua that a figure appeared before him, and that's when he fell in love with God. Because it was the only God that was willing to come and see about him in his darkest time. In his darkest moment, God came and saw about him. So, he exhibited such a love and such a compassion that the miracles that he would display For instance, he walked everywhere, as I said before. Oftentimes, they knew that he was about a mile or two away because everyone in the city would get healed in the hospitals. I've seen some records say that the beds would begin to shake and the people would hop out of the beds, which means that he didn't actually get to pray for the sick all too often because they got healed within a mile or two of being near him. He is actually the inspiration for C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, being the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. C.S. Lewis met Sadhu Sundar Singh when he was in college. And he, in his own ways, wrote many references to the Sadhu in some of his writings. One of the things that Sadhu Sundar Singh is noted for is how often he would visit heaven. Now, in today's time, it's a lot more common for people to have heavenly visitations, or at least it's easier to find them documented, at least. Sadhu Sundar Singh was going into heaven bodily 10 times a month. And he's actually a case where he has no... His body was never found, nor was his death ever confirmed. It's just that 1929 was the last time that people saw him. So there's a few ideas out on what happened to him. Because of how frequent he was visiting heaven bodily, many believe that he just stopped coming back. He encountered an immortal man living on the Kailash Mountains, which is known as the Maharishi of Mount Kailash. It is believed by some that he simply lives with him now. Few people believe that he just died somewhere and they just weren't able to find the body. But he did have a few stories of raising the dead, escaping death himself, being unkillable, countless miracles, countless healings. But actually, he has one of my favorite books called The Visions of the Spiritual World, where he describes the spiritual world in the same way I saw it before I read his book. Which really deals with that whole what happens when people die type of concept, where he talks about being taken on a tour of the spirit world by some of the members of the Cloud of Witnesses. And they're kind of showing him around and teaching him just how the spirit world works. He authored a few different books, and they're all pretty good. Highly recommended. Catherine Kuhlman also has a few books. I Believe in Miracles is one of them. Roberts Liardon wrote about her in his God's General series. And I want to say she's a part of Bill Johnson's Defining Moments. But that's that. So then there's people like Charles Finney. Charles Finney, typically they only talk about him as a theologian if you're studying in like secular school. But if you research him as a person, you find out that he was one of the coolest people that they didn't tell us was cool. And that oftentimes before he went to minister in a city, he would stop at the city limits and pray, and power would sweep over the city and knock everybody to the ground. It's actually believed by some, and I've seen some of the letters myself, that he was the one who ended up contributing to convincing Abraham Lincoln to free the slaves. Because we all know Abraham didn't want to. But that's a whole nother topic. Charles Finney walked in such a manifestation of the fear of the Lord that wherever he went, he was somewhat of a silent evangelist or a silent minister, in that he didn't actually need to talk most times. Even some of his meetings where people would invite him to speak, he wouldn't speak. He would just stand there and the crowd would be overwhelmed in intense laughter or intense crying. They would start having visions and trances and things like that just being around him because he carried that with him. Part of his story is that he locked himself away and prayed and began to encounter what he calls the lightnings of God. So one of the key factors, and I'll talk about that towards the end actually. I'm going to save that to the end. Some other people that I love, Neville Goddard. Now, Neville Goddard is a non-religious mystic. He quoted the Bible a lot, but he wasn't a Christian by any means. Neville Goddard is someone who understood the science of creation, understood sonship very well, understood functioning as God. Understanding your personal divinity is one of the most important things you can do for yourself. And Neville Goddard is one of the best teachers on that. He was mentored by an Ethiopian rabbi named Abdullah. But Neville Goddard was pretty much a self-made millionaire who never took donations. All because he knew how to create his own wealth. He knew how to create his own circumstances by using the imagination. Now, he has stories of healings, of financial breakthrough, and so on and so forth. I want to say he's the one who inspired Reverend Ike, who is a bit more popular. But if you want to start to grow in exercising your own personal divinity, I would recommend a lot of Neville Goddard's works. You can find like a book of his complete collection, and you can also find a ton of his lectures on YouTube. Let's see. One of my other favorite people, Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi was an Italian mystic who was known for communing with nature, in that he would talk to animals. Animals felt safe around him to the point where he could run out dancing into a field full of birds and none of them would fly away because they knew he wasn't going to harm them at all. There are countless stories of birds coming, of animals drawing near to him while he ministered. It's one thing if people come to hear you preach. It's another if all of creation begins to form around you. Because of the frequency that you're releasing, because of the power, because of the love and the compassion that's being radiated from you. One of my favorite stories about him ministering with animals is that he was attempting to minister to a diverse crowd that spoke many different languages, some French, some Italian, some German, some English, some Spanish, and he didn't actually speak all of those languages himself. And the story goes that he stretched out his arms and birds began to land and perch on his arms. And as he spoke, his voice came out of the birds' beaks in all of those different languages. So the birds begin to act as somewhat of a translator for him. There's stories of him preaching on the docks and all the fish come up to the shore. If you live in Texas and you've ever been to like Kima, and they let you feed the fish and they're just at the top. That's kind of what happened whenever he would preach in their water, is that the fish would even try to get out of the water to get near him. He was also he's also famous for his ability to fly and levitate, which would happen when he was in deep ecstatic trances. Also, light would shine from his body. And people would watch him when he didn't know he was being watched, as he would pray, fully focused and fully capsulated, fully enraptured by the beauty that is God. And he would begin to shine and he'd begin to lift up off of the ground. And there were some records that say that on occasion he would fly so high and shine so bright that he looked like a second sun in the sky. Now, he was actually somewhat of the spiritual father to the more famous flying mystic, Joseph of Cupertino, who is even more famous for flying. They call him the Flying Saint. So some other people that I love and respect. Let's see. William Branham. William Branham was a guy who mentored by F.F. Bosworth, but upon his birth, an angel appeared and prophesied, saying, "This is a man of God." He grew up quite regular, but I don't think y'all actually want to hear about his personal life. You could find out a lot of that stuff. He's one of the more documented individuals because he's a lot more recent. There's a few videos of him in action, but he had the best miracle ministry in modern time, as far as how many healings he was able to get through. Actually, there were occasions where he'd host a revival and he would pray for people for days straight, where he would just heal the sick for days and days and days, and he'd sleep on the stage and get up. He'd pray until he passed out, and then he'd go to sleep on the stage, wake up, and continue praying for people. And he'd do that for days at a time. Uh, he had done several dead raisings. There's actually a picture that you can see where a halo appeared over his head while he was preaching. I want to say he was in Louisiana when it happened. But when it comes to healings, I can't recall someone who had a better, at least on paper, a better miracle ministry than William Branham. But what people loved about him was his prophetic accuracy. In all of his years of ministry, he wasn't recorded to have missed once. He didn't get a detail slightly wrong or anything like that. He didn't say Tuesday and it was actually Monday or anything like that. He was always known for being 100% spot on with all of his prophetic words. And the way that he described it is that he would come up over a wall, and while he was over that wall, he could see everything. And when he got done, he would just lower himself back behind that wall. That's the way he described his gift. Let's see. I guess I could branch out past some of the more Christian mystics just for the sake of it. Someone that I actually have grown to like as a historian and as a mystic is Siddhartha Gautama, who's known as the Buddha today. As a Christian, I was taught that Jesus is the only one in history who ever did miracles. And upon doing research, I found out that ain't true. Buddha was actually a known miracle worker in his own time. One of the stories is known as the Twin Miracles, where it was a miracle that he would perform on occasion where he would cause fire to come out of one half of his body and water to spray from the other half of his body, and flip back and forth while he flew in the air and did all types of other things. Outside of the more supernatural things, one of the things that I like about Siddhartha is the mental clarity that he walked in, which is all I believe enlightenment is soulish clarity. That ability to function with a clear mind. I don't agree with all of his stances, but just the fact that an individual is able to get rid of their filters is amazing in itself. Someone else who I've grown to respect is Yogananda Paramahansa, the author of Autobiography of a Yogi. He's actually an example of someone who I found out later about and began to respect due to having my own conversations with Holy Spirit about certain individuals. Because I remember as I was reading Autobiography of a Yogi, I was like, wait a minute. You taught me this. Talking to Holy Spirit, I'm like, you taught me this. Do you know him? And she said, yeah, he was a son. He just had different filters. So I've started to respect him a little bit more. Just understanding that if my mom claims him, he's her kid. But he was known for a lot of things, teaching. People who know me know my stance on yoga, which is why it was surprising to me. But he was one of my favorite people. He's become one of my favorite people as of late, just because of the type of person that he was. Someone who may not be classified. Nah, I won't do that. I won't skip over him like that. Someone else that I like is Lester Levinson. Lester Levinson, much similar to Neville Goddard, taught about, in a way, either, I guess you call it self-realization, God realization. He taught what was known as the Sedona method. And similar to Neville Goddard, he taught people to function and create, manifest, and do all those other things but he taught it in such a specific way. I believe Lester has the best language for what it is that I personally do. In that, in some of his cases, he talks about learning how to move out of the way and let God do all of the work. But not from a Christian perspective of do nothing, but from a very intentional, I'll move my carnality aside so that my divinity can shine forth. So, similar to Neville, he's also one of the best when it comes to functioning in your own personal divinity. Someone else that I've grown to love a lot after reading his book is Lao Tzu, author of the Tao Te Ching. There's not too much information on Lao Tzu. He has a very short story, and then there's few references to him in history, because his story starts upon his retirement, where it said that he was he worked in a kingdom as a part of, he was kind of like a librarian or something like that. So he was super wise. He'd read all these books that was very uncommon. You know, most people at a certain point of history were illiterate, so they couldn't read nor write. And you had this individual who could do both and had worked in a place where all he did was read. So that's wisdom by default in comparison. So it said that he retired and was going to isolate himself and live as a hermit for the rest of his life. And upon making it out of the city limits and like getting ready to officially leave, one of the guards, well, the guard at the gate recognized him and said, "Wait, you're that wise guy. You're leaving us? Wait. Share your wisdom so that we can hang on to something." And the guard began to write down the things that he shared with him. And the Tao Te Ching is one of my favorite books. I recommend the Wayne Dyer translation, but you can find audiobooks and stuff. But Lao Tzu began to share the wisdom that he carried and went off to be left alone for the rest of his life. One of my favorite stories about Lao Tzu, one of the few stories there is about him, is that he met Confucius. And upon meeting Lao Tzu, Confucius didn't talk for 3 days. And his students were worried about him. And finally, after 3 days, he was like, "What's wrong?" He was like, "I understand how this animal works and how that works, and I understand this and that, but I can't understand Lao Tzu. He's like, I don't think he's from Earth." That type of guy can't be real. Just like that woman on the plane that said that guy's not real. So it really led to that joke about Confucius being confused because Lao Tzu spun his head. Let's see. One more person that people love a little bit is Bob Jones, a more recent mystic. Bob Jones recently passed away in like 2013, 2014, something like that. And he was one of the first people in more modern times to talk about having regular experiences in heaven. He was one of the most accurate prophets. It's actually the reason why there was such a prophetic movement in, what was it, like the 70s or the 80s. I want to say part of his testimony is that he received a mantle from an angel, and he's had profound prophetic insight since then. To the point where governments of the world would actually call him. He had a phone with no battery in it that he would pick up and put the battery in whenever he knew somebody was going to call him. And sometimes it was people who would be millionaires or billionaires today. I want to say the guy who created the DeLorean is one of the people whose success has come about by Bob Jones. What's his name? John DeLorean, I think. Yeah, part of his story is that he managed to get in contact with Bob Jones, and Bob Jones prophesied to him over the phone. Bob shared many stories. He was known for being socially awkward, or what some people would consider inappropriate. Not like he was sexual or anything like that, but he just really didn't care about social norms. So he came off as extremely weird. So they often tried to pair him with people to keep him normal. Larry Randolph tells a lot of stories about Bob, where Bob would say some of the most off-the-wall, unhinged stuff that was absolutely needed for the time, which goes to show just how much breakthrough is missed because of the need to cause our space to be normal. That sometimes breakthrough lies in the abnormality of reality. All right, so Bob Jones has a ton of video. You can actually find a lot on him just searching YouTube. All right, I'll end it off with William Seymour, and that'll be it. Like I said, I'm going to be writing articles, so I didn't want to spend too much time on this. William Seymour, child of former slaves, went to ministry school in Houston, Texas. The leader of that ministry school, Charles Fox Parham, who is credited as being the father of Pentecostalism, Pentecostalism really is the efforts of three individuals: Charles Parham, Mariah Woodworth Etter, and William Seymour. William Seymour, being the only black student at the school, wasn't allowed in the building, so they made him sit outside. And when the power of God fell upon him, skipping all the racists on the inside of the building, they got so jealous that they shipped him off to California. And it was in California where they would meet at a place called the Bonnie Bray House. And they would begin to have prayer. I want to say it was Biddy Mason, mother of C.H. Mason, who helped start that. And they were just having prayer. William Seymour didn't have a church. They were just praying in a house, and eventually there was too many people gathering for prayer that at one point they broke the porch and had to find another building, and that's where they finally ended up on Azusa Street. The Azusa Street revival lasted for a few years, and this was one of the best examples of a heaven on earth outside of the Zion, Illinois that John Alexander Dowie created in Chicago, where there was so much power being demonstrated. The presence of God, the glory of God specifically, was so intense, was so manifested that oftentimes people would pass out in the streets walking down the street towards the building, or they'd fall out outside waiting to be let in to the meeting. The way William Seymour led his meeting is that everyone would just flow by the Spirit, and he'd actually pray with his head in a box until he was led by God to do something different. He'd take his head out the box, do what he felt led to do, and then go right back into the box and continue praying. And it wasn't until he eventually stopped praying in the box that all of the supernatural manifestations stopped. There were miracles of all sorts. There were dead raisings, people getting baptized in the Spirit en masse, people encountering the power of God, people being empowered with the power of God. Speaking in tongues was a powerful thing at that day, because before it wasn't as common, but they actually had the fullness of that gift in operation. Today, it's far less common to see manifestations of speaking in tongues that include a lot of earthly languages. A lot of tongues is fake, but some of the real tongues typically are only spiritual languages. They are real languages, they're just not earthly languages. But at Azusa, they would be speaking French and Spanish and Russian, to the point where eventually word spread around the world and people from other countries would start to travel over to California to visit Azusa Street, and they were surprised to find that they could understand everything in their native tongue. It's actually a story of, I want to say it was a Jewish rabbi, different topic, a Jewish rabbi who came to the Azusa Street revival as somewhat of a skeptic until he saw this little girl turn to him and speak to him in his native tongue. That's when he realized they're not making this up. The presence of God would manifest so strong in the building that it would form glory clouds so thick that children could play hide and seek in them. And on occasion, the presence would manifest in a point where it looked like the building was on fire, and the fire department was called several times, only to see no fire once they got close enough. But it could be viewed from miles away where it looked like there was a massive fire. And I believe there's a lot of things that we can learn from the success and failure of the Azusa Street revival. For one, it wasn't even meant for California. It was meant for the entirety of Houston, Texas. That what happened at Azusa in one house was meant to be the entire city of Houston. Now, an apostle I'm close with, Apostle Vincent, I've had him on my channel before. Like, he is very big on restoring Houston to its original purpose. That much I believe we'll see. So, I guess that'll be it for this session. If you want to keep up with the Mystic History Month as I post articles, link to the Patreon is in the description. All of the Mystic History Months are public, so you don't actually have to pay for Patreon in order to read those articles. But much easier to keep up with outside of that would be to join the Facebook group, Cave of Mystery, where I'll be posting the articles daily. So that concludes this episode. I'll talk to y'all later.